This evening, I would like to use this lofty and historic platform to discuss what appears to me to be the most pressing problem confronting us today. Modern humanity has brought this world to an awe-inspiring threshold of the future. We have reached new and astonishing peaks of scientific success. We have produced machines that think and instruments that peer into the unfathomable ranges of interstellar space. We have built gigantic bridges that span the seas and gargantuan buildings that kiss the skies. Airplanes and spaceships have dwarfed distance, placed time in chains, and carved highways through the stratosphere. This is a dazzling picture of modern humanity's scientific and technological progress. Yet in spite of these spectacular strides in science and technology, and still unlimited ones to come, something basic is missing. There is a sort of poverty of the spirit, which stands in glaring contrast to our scientific and technological abundance. The richer we have become materially, the poorer we have become morally and spiritually. We have learned to fly the air like birds and swim the sea like fish, but we have not learned the simple art of living together in unity. We live in two realms, the internal and the external. The internal is that realm of spiritual ends expressed in art, literature, morals, and religion. The external is that complex of devices, techniques, mechanisms, and instrumentalities by means of which we live. Our problem today is that we have allowed the internal to become lost in the external. We have allowed the means by which we live to outdistance the ends for which we live. This is the serious predicament, the deep and haunting problem confronting modern humanity. If we are to survive today, our moral and spiritual lag must be eliminated. Enlarged material power spelled an enlarged peril if there is not proportionate growth of the soul. When the without of human nature subjugates the within, dark storm clouds begin to form in the world. The problem of spiritual and moral lag, which constitutes modern humanity's chief dilemma, expresses itself in three larger problems which grow out of humanity's ethical infancy. Each of these problems, while appearing to be separate and isolated, is inextricably bound to the other. I refer to racial injustice, poverty, and war. The deep rumbling of discontent that we hear today is the thunder of disinherited masses rising from dungeons of oppression to the bright hills of freedom. All over the world, like a fever, the great masses of people are determined to end the exploitation of their races and land. They are awake and moving toward their goal like a tidal wave. You can hear them rumbling in every village street, on the docks, in the houses, among the students, in the churches, and at political meetings. The era of colonialism is at an end. These developments should not surprise any student of history. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The yearning for freedom eventually manifests itself. The Bible tells the story of how Moses stood in Pharaoh's court centuries ago and said, "Let my people go." This is a kind of opening chapter in a continuing story. The present struggle in the United States is a later chapter in the same unfolding story. The United States has developed the greatest system of production that history has ever known. We have become one of the richest nations in the world. Yet at least 1/5 of our fellow citizens are bound to a miserable culture of poverty. In a sense, the poverty of the poor in America is more frustrating than the poverty of Africa and Asia. The misery of the poor in Africa and Asia is a shared misery. They are all poor together as a result of years of exploitation and underdevelopment. In sad contrast, the poor in America know that they live in the richest nation in the world, and that even though they are perishing on a lonely island of poverty, they are surrounded by a vast ocean of material prosperity. So it is obvious that if humanity is to redeem our spiritual and moral lag, we must go all out to bridge the social and economic gulf between the haves and the have-nots of the world. Poverty is one of the most urgent items on the agenda of modern life. Violence as a way of achieving racial or economic justice, however, is both impractical and immoral. I am not unmindful of the fact that violence often brings about momentary results. Nations have frequently won their independence in battle, but in spite of temporary victories, violence never brings peace, not permanent peace. It solves no social problem. It merely creates new and more complicated ones. Violence is impractical because it is a descending spiral ending in destruction for all. Violence is immoral because it seeks to humiliate the opponent rather than win their understanding. It seeks to annihilate rather than convert. Violence is immoral because it thrives on hatred rather than love. It creates bitterness in the survivors and brutality in the destroyers. So we must fix our vision not merely on the negative expulsion of war, but upon the positive affirmation of peace. We must see that peace represents a sweeter music, a cosmic melody that is far superior to the discords of war. Now, all that I have said boils down to the point of affirming that humanity's survival is dependent upon our ability to solve the problems of racial injustice, poverty, and war. The solution of these problems is in turn dependent upon humanity squaring our moral progress with our scientific progress and learning the practical art of living in harmony. This call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love for all. Now, when I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response, which is little more than emotional bosh. I am speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door, which leads to ultimate reality. We can no longer afford to worship the God of hate or bow before the altar of retaliation. Love is the key to the solution of the problems of the world. Every single word I just said, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. So Dr. King used those words in his 1964 Nobel Peace Lecture when he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And how many of you thought, how appropriate? 60 years later, how apropos are these words? Racial injustice, poverty, war. How many of us passed the unhoused on the way here today? How many of us heard about the latest atrocities going on in the world, in the war? Pick a war. How many of us are related to, have heard, have talked to someone who has been profiled because of their race, their skin color, sexual orientation, gender identity, socioeconomic background? See, everybody knows I have a dream. I Have a Dream is a beautiful, prolific, moving body of work. However, it's only one. It's one lecture, one moment in time. And though he did publish it later, it was one piece of a much larger legacy that Dr. King left us. It would kind of be like defining Rev King by one of his talks. And good luck with that. Right? If you've been a part of Unity, if you've watched us online, there was that one talk that really spoke to you. It may not be the same one that spoke to me. So, I Have a Dream was the beacon for a movement. It was a beautiful moment in time. But I'm going to challenge you all to think a little bit bigger when you think about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Because there's so much more that we could mine, that we could learn from, that we could emulate. And I love Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's talk because it is so parallel to our Unity teachings. That was 1964. We lost him 5 years later. But in that brief period of time, and we're going to talk about how brief his beacon actually shined. In the brief period of time that we had Dr. King leading the charge, he changed the world. The world we live in, the world I lived in, I grew up in, and the world that my children grow up in is not the world of my mother. Absolutely not the world of my grandmother or her mother. And we owe that in part to Dr. King. So I'm a preacher and a teacher, so I got to share some facts with you. You know how we do this. So I'm going to just share a couple things that you may not know. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was actually born Michael King. Did you know that? He was born Michael King in 1929. Then his father, Reverend Michael Sr., who was a minister, he was a head minister at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, he went to Germany 1 year after Adolf Hitler was named chancellor. It was a part of the Baptist Church Alliance, the Baptist World Alliance meeting, rather. But this is when Adolf was influencing what was going on in Germany. And while he was there, he toured and he traveled. And he went to the home of Martin Luther. Anybody know who Martin Luther is? The father of the Protestant movement? He was so moved and so touched that when he came back, he not only changed his name, he changed his son's. Talk about life-changing. Now, Michael Jr. didn't actually get his name changed until he was 5 years old. And apparently, if you look, you can find his birth certificate where they crossed out Michael and they wrote Martin Luther, and they dated it. Imagine how moved you have to be to change your child's name. So some might say that he had a destiny. He was already going to be called to follow some pretty big shoes, right? Follow some footsteps. Okay. He got married at 24. He had 4 children between 55 and 63, Yolanda, MLK III, Dexter, and Bernice. He was a minister at 19. He was the head minister, his first appointment, at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, at 25. Now, I want to ask this question. Does anyone know why he's Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King? How many of you think it's an honorific? There are so many people who are giving these honorary titles. No, he earned his PhD in 1955 in systematic theology. He was a doctor of systematic theology. So put some respect on his name. I cringe every time I hear somebody say Martin. Well, Martin Luther King, no. Well, Martin, You better Reverend Doctor that. Just saying, if you earned it, he earned it. He was appointed the lead of the first civil rights event in 1955 at 26. Now understand, he had already been a part of the civil rights movement. This was just the first time he led it. So this is the first time we knew his name. 26 years old. Okay? He was named Man of the Year in 63, 34 years old. Awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 64, 35 years old. In addition to all of the talks and all of the miles, and I do mean miles, that he traveled so that he could speak against injustice, whether it was poverty, race, any inequity or inequality anywhere, you could find Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King speaking against it. Did you know that he was an advisor to JFK Jr.? That the president, actually, before making a decision, said, get Dr. King on the phone. I want to talk to him. And then it was only after speaking to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King that he said, okay, and then he addressed the nation. You want to talk about a powerful man? Now, we lost Martin. See what I did there? In 1968, at 39. So the first time we heard his name, he was 26 years old. And when they snuffed out his light, he was 39. That's 13 years. 13 years. The man rewrote the world in 13 years. So he had 13 years of influence, and he has an infinite tenure of impact. And he was humble through it all. They asked him, how do you want to be remembered? And he says, I just want to be remembered as the drum major for justice. Now, drum majors, let's talk about that. In the historic black college and university community. The drum major is that person that flies out, typically has the biggest hat, very colorful ensemble, and is working it out. Has the best moves. And it's just typically sent out to get your attention. Immediately. You were watching a game. Focus on me now. And then they stand there and they do all the things. And you're on your feet and you're cheering them along. And they're doing all of this while behind them, the band is getting in place. The dancers are getting in place. And when everybody's where they're supposed to be, they move out the way. And then the real show begins. So for him to say, I want to be the drum major of justice, that just means I will draw focus until you are in place to do the work. That's what he wanted to be remembered for. Now, we are unitics, which means we are Christian adjacent. Right? We believe that Jesus was the great example, not the great exception. So this Baptist, hyper-Christian minister, what are we talking about him for? Aside from the fact that he was amazing, but from a spiritual and religious perspective, how can we align his example to unity teachings? Well, let's talk about it. Want to talk about it? Here we go. Principle 1. There is only one presence and one power active as the universe and in my life, God. Unity and harmony was his sole focus. Universal equity. You are me and I am you. We should be having the same example, the same experience, the same life journey on this planet. I am to love you like I love myself. If that's not unity, I don't know what is. That was his message. All I want is to be like you because I am you. Principle 2, we are divinity in expression and therefore we are inherently good. I don't even have to tell you that one. No one is bad. It's not a race thing. It's not a socioeconomic thing. It's not a gender identity thing. We are all one, and therefore we are all deserving. We are all worthy. There is no such thing as a wretch like me. Principle 3. We create with our thoughts and beliefs. Every word he ever spoke manifested our future. Did he not? Was he not the architect, the artist that allows me to stand in this room where I am absolutely a member of the minority? But I have your focus. Never would have happened before him. Y'all have all been looking like me if I'm up here. Or I'd be up there. Come on, family. So every word he ever spoke, I can stand here and do my thing and call myself a minister. We are talking about black church. You know, black church, women can't be ministers. Just saying, right? Principle 4, through prayer and meditation, we align our heart mind with God. This was a powerful man of faith. He believed. Every cell, every piece of his existence was committed to what he was doing. Interesting story. His home was bombed. He had children. At the time, I think he only had one child. And his father, Reverend Senior, came to get his wife and said, I'm not going to have them kill my grandchild. You coming with me. And her response, now this is Coretta Scott King, she said, yes, I'm married to your son, but I'm married to the movement. We ain't going nowhere. As a woman who has been married for a very long time, you have to have some powerful affinity as an individual to have someone believe in you that much, to have someone be willing to put themselves in harm's way. I use his wife as an example, but let's be honest. Every person who ever stood in silent or vocal, non-violent protest with this man during an era where dying and being killed and being brutalized was the norm, that is a man of faith. A faith that is so powerful, it enfolded everybody around him. So powerful, it inspired them to work with him. So inspiring, they joined the band. Principle 5, through thoughts, words, and actions, we live in the truth we know. He walked the talk, and they killed him for it. But he's also a very clear example that the principles work. Right? The principles work. There is only one power and one presence. Everyone is inherently good. We create with our thoughts, with prayer and meditation, and through our thoughts, we can change the world. He did that. So, what is your call? What is your area where your faith is so powerful, people will be moved to join the band? So MLK had a very short life with a very lasting impact. About over a third of his life that we know, he was active. He was invested and dedicated to activism, but he spent his entire life learning. He did not play small. He stood in his dominion and he was convicted, even when it endangered his closest loved ones. So, where can you lean into unity principle to make impact? Where are you showing up small? Not everybody's path is as clearly defined as his appears to be. His father was a minister. He grew up and became a minister. That was not my journey. That was not Ken's journey. But through prayer and meditation, we can identify what is ours to do. What is truly ours to do. So where are you showing up small? Where you're playing at commitment and you're not fully convicted in the work? Are you playing small because you aren't sure it's yours to do? I highly recommend you take some classes. Do some more deep work. Maybe you need to do some shadow work. Lean into metaphysics a bit and identify what is yours to do. Or, as Marianne Williamson likes to tell us, are we afraid? What's the quote, Ken?
Light. It's not our darkness that frightens us most. It is our light.
Bam. Are you afraid that your light will shine brighter than you can handle because you got a community right here that will support you? I will gladly join your band. We already know I got a big mouth. I'm right there with you. I will let you drum major me. So there's no reason to be fearful. Because if it's yours, if you don't do it, it won't get done. So say you know your path. You know what is yours to do. I know this is my path. He afflicted this comfortable person. It works, don't tell him. So if it's yours, how can you play bigger? How can you be broader in those spaces and those places that are yours to do? So I know that there are people in this room who have chosen to stand in solidarity with the battered and oppressed people, adding their chorus, adding to the chorus of change. I know that there are people who provide outreach to the unhoused, the unhealed, and the unhappy. You pass them right down the street. You could also be a place of refuge for the embattled and the broken, those that are waging their own war on their journey to understanding what their calling is. So, Dr. King changed the world in 13 years. With his dedication to equity and equality and his tireless work toward it, our reality is very different from the one he lived in, and we are grateful. However, while life in the United States and the world in general is much better than it was in the 50s and the 60s, the work is not done. In a world where George Floyd, Ernie Serrano, Club Q, Visha Ratanapathy, Ukrainians, Palestinians, and countless others are losing their lives to hate, the work is not done. And we are grateful for the example that Reverend Dr. King, the drum major for justice, has set for us all. So let's take that to our time of meditation.